Welcome to Faith in 5, a weekly video devotional designed to discuss practical spiritual concepts in 5 minutes or less. I'm your host, Mark Vandella. I want to tell you a story about my friend Timothy. Timothy and I met in kind of a unique situation. I was hanging out really late one night at a friend's house that lived downtown. And we were hanging out just outside of his place. I think we were hungry, so we wandered down. There's a pizza place next door. So we grabbed a piece of pizza, and they have these delicious, they call them breadsticks, but they're literally dough balls covered in garlic and butter and all this stuff. So we were sitting outside eating that, and this guy walks by. We made eye contact, so I asked him how he was doing. I said, "Hey, how are you?" His response was, "I'm hungry." I said, "Well, can I get you a piece of pizza?" He kind of looked at me weird and thought, what? Right, you examine the intentions of the other person. Why are you asking me this? Like, really? What's the catch? So I asked him his story, asked him where he was from, found out he was from another place but had come here to get some help. And I was looking for housing. So we ended up getting a piece of pizza, and as we stood in line, I learned more and more about him. And I told him that if something came up, he had a couple meetings with these organizations here in town, and if something didn't work out, to let me know. So I gave him my card. I wrote my cell phone number on the card, and he actually gave me his number as well. A couple weeks went by, and I hadn't necessarily forgotten about Timothy, but it wasn't a part of my normal life. And my phone rings, and it shows up Timothy on my phone. So I answered. I was excited to hear from him. I actually was excited to hear that he got housing, but that wasn't the case. He had actually not had good luck in some of these organizations. So I went to work on trying to find some options, and in that time, I wasn't able to find him housing. He had done that on his own, but because we continued this conversation, I actually was able to help provide some bedding, a couch, a variety of other things to kind of fill his new apartment. And it was a lot of fun to show up with a trailer full of things. And he introduced me to everybody there, and we just started a friendship from there. He's attended our church. We still interact on Facebook quite a bit. I actually had lunch with him last week. I tell you that story because I was at the moment, I was in the middle of preparing a sermon on kind of diversity and what real rich community might look like. And if I weren't preparing that sermon and I weren't reading some books that were going to help me create this sermon, I'm not sure I would have responded the way I did. See, there was one book that is called Friendships in the Margins, and it says that oftentimes when we try to live out our faith, we assume that the poor and vulnerable or those without faith need us, that what we bring to the table is somehow exactly what they need and somehow better. But this book argues that what if we approached it from a friendship angle? That if we reframe it to mean friendship, then basically both of our needs are met. It's not just a one-way exchange, it's a both and. And that's how Timothy and I's relationship started, and that's how it continues to be. Another book I was reading at the time is called Here and Now by Alan Hirsch, and in that he says that if we want to experience heaven, people should be able to experience just a foretaste of what that's like by how they interact with us, by how our communities look. And if I combine those two things, it made me think, what would heaven look like? Or what does heaven look like? And so in that process, I stumbled upon Revelation 7:9 that says, in heaven, there's a crowd of people that's too many to count. It's all nations, all tribes, all languages, and all races. And as I thought about my life and the people that I interact with, it didn't look much like that. Other than my relationship with Timothy, it didn't look much different from people wearing what I wear and talking like I talk. And so I decided that day that if I wanted to live more like heaven here on earth, I needed to be intentional about existing in those places. See, I think we can follow Jesus' example. There's a spot in the Bible where in Matthew's telling a story of how Jesus went to his house for dinner, and there were all these different people invited. And the people, the onlookers, the Pharisees even said, who is this guy that goes and hangs out with crooks? The Message version even calls them riffraff. Right? And see, in this moment, generally, we all assume that Jesus is the only one giving in this situation. But see, Matthew is providing this variety of folks for Jesus to hang out with. And later, as my story continued with Timothy and as this developed, I've heard him tell his side of the story. And he said, he always kind of had one eye open and one eye over his shoulder. And he was worried about what other people would see, him hanging out with this guy. I think Matthew had the same thing. Well, who is this guy Jesus who wants to spend time with me? See, if we reshape our interactions with other people who are unlike us, we can start to see and start to experience more of heaven here on earth. So I'd ask, as you go live your life, who is it that's different from you? Where, in what spots do you interact with all nations and tribes and languages and races so that you can experience rich community? Much like Jesus created at the table at Matthew's house. How might you do that? How might you pursue that? And then what do you bring to the table in that exchange? Thanks for tuning in. If you want to follow us each week, click here to subscribe. And if you want to take it a little bit further, click here for discussion materials.